Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry. Oh my God, sorry. Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry for the interruption. My name is Charlotte, and I'll be hosting today's TMS. Today's TMS is about grant writing, and it's by Valerie Ticker. She's from the Delaware Criminal Justice Council. She specializes in criminal justice grant writing. So it's not scientific grant writing. So we're going to watch the webinar, and then maybe we can have someone from the audience as well who can talk a bit more about how this actually applies to scientific grant writing and kind of open up the discussion a bit.
Today, we're thrilled to have an expert with us talking to us about grant writing. We wanted to do this now because the solicitation from the Bureau of Justice Assistance to apply for CARA grants is out, and the applications will be due at the end of April. So we wanted to have this session so that anybody in the stakeholder community who has an interest in applying for CARA funds can have the benefit of the expertise that Valerie Tickle is going to give us today. But we also want this to be useful for any grant, not just for CARA. So her presentation is related to grant writing generally, not just about CARA, so that we can use these principles of good grant writing for any grant, regardless of the topic. We hope these lessons will be applicable in the future. So we thank Valerie Tickle, who is the Criminal Justice Coordinator with the Delaware Criminal Justice Council. She has years of successful experience in applying for grants from the Department of Justice and other agencies. But as important, she reviews grants by localities and nonprofits in Delaware, so she knows what grants need to look like. And she conducts regular training for potential grantees in Delaware. So let me just start with a few housekeeping matters. All attendees will be on mute throughout the duration of the webinar. If you want to ask questions, please do. You can do it using the questions drop-down menu in the Go to Webinar control panel. And we are recording the webinar today, and we'll make it available on our websites afterwards. So Valerie, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. I have been doing grant writing for several years now. It's something I do enjoy, and it's a topic we try to make fun as much as it is useful. So this particular webinar today is a grant writing 101. So I just wanted to let the listeners know that it's a basic overview of grant writing. There may be a wide mixture of experience on the line. So we ask you to go ahead and hang in there. There could be some sort of gem or thing that may be useful. As a grant writer, I do attend other trainings to see what one thing might help elevate my grant writing to the next level. So let us begin on how to design a program and write a grant proposal. So in the world of grant writing and designing programs, we use logic models. And you can hear this a number of times, and a lot of times we attach logic models to grants, and they're really the connection between the activities, the inputs, the outcomes, and there are a series of if-then statements. So logic models can be very simple or complex. We use logic models every day. I think, even in coming to work. If it is raining outside, then I'll need to bring an umbrella. If there is traffic on the highway that I'm going to take, then I'll take an alternative route. So it's really a linear way of thinking logically through a process, and it's very useful in the grant writing world. Grants are always tied to objectives. So when we think about creating objectives and being measurable, we have an acronym. We love acronyms, and SMART objectives. So when you think about your program and designing your grant, you want it to be specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, and time-bound. So we'll go over each one of these different types of objectives and how to work SMART objectives into your proposal as you're writing and planning your grant. So in the program design, this is a nice visual. I've kept this up in front of me as a logic model to work through the grant writing process. And it really breaks it down in a few steps needed to write the grant. And it keeps everything on track and in line and organized in a fashion that's easy to follow. So we start with the problem statement. And just to disclose, I am a big superhero fan. So you'll notice in my example, the little love for superheroes there. And so we focused on Gotham City, because if there are any superhero fans on the line, we know Batman has the best villains, and Gotham City is just riddled with crime. So that was what we chose to use as our example. So in your problem statement, it's really taking a look at what's wrong, an assessment of what needs to change, what's going on in your specific area. You absolutely want to use local data and statistics as much as possible, and evidence-based arguments. So when you think about your problem, it's really, you're trying to convey to the reader what's going on in your specific area, in your world, what do you want to address? So the example here, adult victims of crime in Gotham City do not have available services to adequately recover. And then there you cite where you have that information. As a result, 50% experience a decrease in their job, school performance, family life, and mental health. So further, 50% of individuals with prior victimization are prone to re-victimization. Again, citing where you get these statistics, because it's important to tie them back to a source of information. So as a result, Gotham City Police seek to start a victim service unit to aid the victims in crime, locating relevant services, assisting them through the prosecution process. So this unit will be started and led by the new victim service coordinator in Gotham City Precinct. The VSC will contact victims within 48 hours of the initial report by offering the victims in-house services. The goal is that victims will feel less vulnerable, less fear, and increase trust in the system after working with the new victim service coordinator. So that's a really short synopsis of a problem statement. I also try to let people know I come from a Chicken Little family. So, we don't want to say the sky is falling. We don't want to put every different statistic of every different problem into a problem statement. We want to make sure that we're talking about the specific problem that's relevant to the program you're about to propose. So any factors that might play a part. You also, and when you're using local statistics, it's okay to start broad. The way I generally do it is I might use a national statistic and say, across the nation, such and such is happening. Then I kind of bring it in. So I might say across the nation, and then tear it down even to maybe East Coast or West Coast, and then within my specific state, down, so on and so forth, to if the grant is dealing with some kind of even specific geographic location, drilling down the data accordingly. But you want to just make sure that you're describing a problem that is the same size of your proposed solution. So when you're thinking about the problem statement, it kind of feels like English class. You're thinking about the who, what, where, when, and why. So if you're answering these questions, you're really building the solid problem statement. So who is your target population? In this particular example, we're looking at adult crime victims. So what's causing this particular issue or problem? There's negative outcomes. When? Within 48 hours of the initial report. And where is this problem taking place? And it's in the GCPD Central Precinct. And why? What might be causing this? Crimes are rampant in Gotham City, which is causing an influx of victims. So again, a quick synopsis of the problem statement there. Gotham City, victims in Gotham City lack the services to navigate the system, so they're prone to experience the negative outcomes. Next, you want to look at your goal statement. So all the program activities are tied to the goal. Your goal is really your broad sweeping statement of what you want to do, what you want to address, and you want this to be measurable. So following our example, the victim service coordinator will provide direct services to 100 unduplicated victims per year. The GCPD anticipates the number will increase 3 to 5% each year due to the increased presence and trust in the community. Now, what's important here too is to note that a baseline will be established, because a lot of times if you're putting in a measurable objective, you have to have something to measure against. So creating a baseline to measure against is important, so someone who is reading the grant knows that you have a way to measure these things. So the goal statement, again, following the problem, how will the proposed program provide the resolution to the stated problem? What will be done and what action will be measured? So how you're flowing through here. And then the implementation objectives. The implementation objectives, when you're writing a grant, is really your description of how you're going to get this project off the piece of paper and into the real world. So a lot of times these are the time limited and they're tied directly to the program. So they're the inputs, the things that you need to build your particular project comprehensively. Are you hiring people? What materials are you buying? Do you need equipment? So all these different inputs that you would need to put into your program, and you want to make sure to describe them in your grant writing and in your proposal, exactly what you need. So in our example, the GCPD wants to provide direct service to victims. So if they want to do that, then they will need to hire the staff, establish office space, buy the staff person a computer. They may need volunteers, access to a car to transport victims. And again, this example is transferable, I would say, to a lot of different program areas, and a lot of different topics. So then the new coordinator will work with local agencies to coordinate wraparound services and transport the victims when necessary. So following our logic model, the implementation, again, addresses how the program will become functional. How are we going to begin to move this from a design, from a concept, from the think tank onto the paper, out into the real world? So looking at personnel, equipment, and who will conduct the activity of the program. It's essential to describe the roles and responsibilities in the different grants and proposals. You want to make sure you're very clear in stating who will be doing what. If you're hiring a new person, what's that person's job duties? What's their responsibility to the program that you're proposing? What steps and different things will they be assigned to address directly the problem that you have stated? Your performance objectives are really your day-to-day activities. So it's the operation, the frequency of your particular program, what the program does, and how often. So this is the result, your activities, your input. You're focusing here on what's being done, not what has changed yet. So these are your outputs. Some different examples here would be on a daily basis or on a quarterly basis. You want to make sure you're describing kind of that time frame again. You may assist 90 victims, provide 75 referrals to service providers, advocacy and support to 100 different individuals. So these are just some examples of the daily activities. So now that you have described your problem, you went ahead and established your goal, you've hired your people, obtained your necessary items. Now, what are you going to do with all of that? How are you going to function in the program? So a lot of times in the applications, a next logical step would be how you're going to implement and what that implementation looks like and the daily activities. So how are you going to accomplish those goals? Who will the program serve and how many people will be served? And after all that, we want to evaluate the impact. What is the outcome of the project? So you can look at the impact objectives in several ways. There's the initial and the intermediate and a long term. And grants, a lot of the grants will run in certain time frames. They might be 2 years, they might be 3 years, or even 1 year grants. So a lot of times you can only do so much in that time frame. So you want to make sure when you're establishing your impact objectives and what the program accomplished, that you have that in mind. So of course your initial outcomes are what's closely related to those outputs. What first benefits might have happened or changes the participants or clients or whoever you're serving, what have they experienced? And the intermediate program outcome is what difference the program made. So it refers back to the problem and addresses whether that identified problem was truly indeed affected by the presence of your particular program. So it's the so what. You know, we've established there was this problem. We have put these things in place. So what has happened? So here you are focusing on what has changed. And did something make a difference? Are there new behaviors or changes based on the operation of your program? Has new knowledge been shared? Have connections been made to programs, to resources, skills that have been built? Your long term is looking way out into the future, your ultimate change. All this has happened, and as a result of it, the world is a better place. The changes in the condition, the status of the participant, the life change that's happened. So we can get into the examples here. So examples of our impact objectives, our initial impact. So if the GCPD created a victim service coordinator position, then 75% of victims served report a greater knowledge of A, the community resources, B, the safety planning, C, their rights and options, and D, the criminal justice process. So that's what they got immediately. They've increased their knowledge base. Now, taking that increased knowledge, then at least 50% of the victims will access the relevant service. So now we've given them the knowledge, hopefully they're accessing the services. So then in the long term, If they are accessing the services, then we envision that at least 25% will gain greater coping mechanisms and reduce the risk of future victimization. So here you can see how it kind of lays out accordingly from start to finish as a result of the program. So just to go over the impact of objectives once again, what did the program do? What did the program accomplish? What were these different impacts? So 75% of the victims reported greater knowledge, the community resources, and then take advantage of that knowledge. So when you're thinking about designing your proposal and your grant, you have to consider a lot of different things. When you're talking about what you're going to measure, you have to think about what's going to be the data source for the program. And these are all important things to describe when you're writing your grant. How will you obtain the information? Is it realistic? Can you get that information? So if you are maybe talking about outcomes as a result of a problem, I work a lot in the offender reentry world. So if we talk about recidivism and decreasing that number, I have to also make sure I have access to that data and I know where that data is coming from and how will it be collected, how will it be addressed. So I want to make sure that I describe in the program, in the proposal, those different elements. Can I get it? And can I convey that my program was a success? Then it's also important to describe how will success or failure be determined. So I'm very clear in saying success of the program will be, and making sure that the reader understands how that's going to be determined as a result of the program. So in writing the grant, you want to definitely make sure that the narrative is convincing. It's really a unique style of writing I've learned over the years, because when you're writing a problem statement, it feels a little bit like maybe a research paper. When you're going into your program design, it's really kind of pitching your idea. It's kind of a creative way to talk about your story and what you see as something that would help. And you want to write with confidence. I think that's kind of an important thing. When you go in and you're structuring your grant proposal, you want to make sure the reader knows that you can operate this program. So you want to make sure when you're telling your story and designing your objectives that you fill in all those holes and you are absolutely confident and you come across in the writing of your grant. And these things I always keep in mind, because writing the grants, when you think about objectives, a lot of times people will get a little apprehensive about putting numbers in. You know, oh my goodness, if I say I'm going to decrease recidivism by 10%, what if that doesn't happen? Or if I say I'm going to serve 100 individuals and that doesn't really come to fruition. I think they also, in all my experiences with grant writing and different entities and different projects, you want to be measurable in your objectives. Go ahead and put a number in, put it in confidently, and keep in mind that things are usually pretty flexible. And if you find when you're operating your program, something is a little awry, definitely talk to whatever funder you might have or a program manager. I tell the different grantees here in Delaware, you know, it's that good faith effort as well. So if you establish your objective and you're not quite meeting it, just let us know how, let us know why. And then if that needs to be changed. So they never let those sorts of things get in the way of your writing. you want to make sure that you've thought out your program and it is realistic, but you also want to be ambitious. And it's a little hard to kind of maybe find that fine line between the two. But keep in mind that those things can often be looked at throughout the process of the grant and of the project. And also, I keep in mind that design programs in the real world, there's all these different factors that affect grants: environmental, personality, experience. Sometimes a particular program works very well, and it might be that it's the particular person operating the program that was just the perfect person for the job. And we have to think about that when we're designing a project, or if we're replicating something. What things make that grant work. One example I used years ago, we were writing grant for offender reentry, and we also teamed up with several other entities in the state, and we were looking at a Department of Labor grant and a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant, and we got everything together, got it in. We were successful in obtaining the grant, and it was back in that 2008 timeframe when employment just started going a little further down and not being quite so easy for those returning from incarceration. So we had no idea that was really going to happen when we were planning the project, but that was one of those kind of broader factors that came after the fact. We had the grant, we were still moving forward with employment. It was just, we had to kind of think about how we would do that as a result of something that was kind of out of our hands. So when thinking about the logic model, it offers that relationship. And just keep in mind things that correlation does not exactly equal causation. So when you're thinking about looking at the impact in the program evaluation, you want to keep that in mind. A lot of different grants call for researchers, and they are wonderful in helping you design those portions of your program and of your grant. It'll help guide you in looking at those sorts of things. So again, just talking about the performance measurement, it's really important and that we describe the program and that it is measurable, and it's important for a lot of different reasons. It's important for the broad spectrum of the different grant or proposal. You have federal reporting, accountability, evaluation, replication. A lot of times we want to make sure that our particular program is going to give whatever funder the information needed to continue funding these sorts of things, to continue helping people across the country or within your state. You want to make sure that it's very useful in the information. It also helps with
Come mai? Non si trovavano.
So it helps you with your design implementation and managing your program and the different decisions you have to make as you move forward, evaluating. And then, of course, with grant funding, we know that it's got time limits and then it's over, and we want to make sure our program continues on and is sustainable beyond just those grant funds. So it's important when you have a strong program design up front that you can take it to the next level, find other funding to continue on. So you also have to develop the budget. It's kind of interesting in the grant world. A lot of times we wear two hats. So I get to write and I get to do the calculations and play with the budget. So when you're looking at your budget, you want to make sure that you're looking at the different categories. It usually in the different grants, they ask for a detailed budget worksheet and a budget narrative. So we'll talk about both of those and what those items look like. The budget should really reflect the quality of your program planning. You want to make sure that you cover all the costs associated with your program. So make sure you pay attention to all those little things that you need. Estimates are acceptable. Kind of like with the objectives, you want to put your numbers in there, but knowing that sometimes you have to estimate. You want to pay attention to the amount of funding available and the number of years to spend the funds. So that's really important. As you're planning your program, make sure you double check how many years you might have to spend it. Now, this bullet point here is important. I know that we do it. A lot of us do it. When you see a proposal, a solicitation advertised, you go right and flip through and you go right, how much money can I get? That's great. Keep in mind though, when you're designing your program, you want to only put in there what the program costs. It may or may not be the total amount of available funding. There have been several times when we have planned a program and we did the whole design and took a look at it, and the budget came up and it wasn't exactly to the ceiling of the dollar amount. So I just put in for what we needed. And sometimes that really works to your benefit, because if a few people have done that, then the funder may be able to award, instead of 5 or 6 grants, 7 or 8 grants. So it's important to keep in mind that you're really asking for in the budget exactly what your program is paying for. So make sure that those things are related and make sense. You don't want to kind of just put a lot of random things in your budgets, because the whole grant proposals are all tied to a point system. So you want to make sure everything makes sense and you maximize your chances in receiving the funds. Now, this may be applicable to some and not to others, but in a lot of the grants I write, they are justice grants. So several grants might ask for a match. So the match dollars are your program buy-in. So in the budget, I make sure it is very clear what costs are federal dollars and what costs are maybe state, local resources, what they call match. And a lot of times if a solicitation or a grant is asking for program buy-in or match, it will be clear in the solicitation and they give you what calculation you have to use. So the different budget categories, usually the funder will give them to you, but you have your basic ones: personnel, your fringe, travel, equipment, supplies, consultants, others. So your budget narrative is really your explanation of your cost in words. So it really answers the question, why do you need this item in the budget? So it looks over those expenses. It should be brief, only a few sentences. So I'm going to go through the different budget categories. I might go through them just a little quickly, because I do want to make sure we get to the program tips at the end of the presentation, and that we also leave some time for questions. So when you're looking at the budget, personnel, you want to ask yourself, do you need to hire personnel to implement it? And if so, you want to list the position title, what percentage of the position is being paid for in the grant. If you know who will be working on the grant, it's okay. If you don't, sometimes it's a new hire. So you want to show that computation. The other important thing is if there isn't any personnel that you're hiring, I always mark the different categories NA and make sure it's 0. I want to leave no questions in a reviewer's mind. So you want to make sure that if it's not something you're doing, make sure it's clear that you didn't forget it, that you actually just aren't using that category. So here you can see how we broke down the calculations of the personnel. You want to show your math. So an example of a budget narrative statement, since Gotham City Police, since they're starting the victim service unit and they're locating the relevant services to assist them through the prosecution process. So it kind of describes where the person's going to be at, why they're needed for the grant, that 100% of the grant funded activities, so the funds will pay for the victim service coordinator. There's going to be a supervisor involved, and then a little job description of what that coordinator is going to do. And then you also want to say how you came up with that cost. So you've based that salary on maybe different job duties and workloads by similar coordinators, and it follows your agency hiring scales. So you want to make sure that you're not just kind of pulling it out of thin air. You want to tell where you got these figures and how you came up with the numbers. So if you hire somebody, you have to have fringe benefits as well. So you want to list them accordingly. So it's only for the percentage of time or the hours devoted to the project. So if you've hired someone 100%, 100% of their fringe would be listed. If it's 50% and so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that in your calculations you show that as well. And then again in the narrative, just explaining what the benefit rate might be for your particular agency. And then that breakdown. In the travel category, you want to list a few of the different grants might require trainings or conferences. So you want to make sure you read in the solicitation in all those different areas and see if there's required training or there's anything that you have to include. In this particular example, we have the individuals going to Metropolis to get training, which is the hometown of my favorite superhero, Superman. But anyway, so we want to look at how those rates were determined, and the GSA website is how you come up with those different calculations. If you just Google GSA, it will give you the rate for any area in the country and what the per diem is and all those calculations that you need to show in your budget. So do you need equipment to meet your objectives? Then you want to list that as well. A lot of times equipment's a one-time cost, so be careful if you're planning with multiple years. If you're copying and pasting your budget or something like that, just be sure that if you have equipment listed in year one, but you're not rebuying it in year two, take that back out. A reviewer will pick up on that. So you want to make sure that you've got everything set accordingly. And then again, the justification as to why you need that equipment and if you've obtained a quote or not. And you have your supplies and operating. So you want to just list whatever is included in that category for the grant. And then justify what those costs are. Your office space, your office supplies, do you need cabinets? And then you have the consultant contract area. If you do have someone coming in to do a particular service, and then making sure that you're following any guidelines with the funder. The federal rate, the allowable cost is $650 a day. So you just want to make sure you include those items and those calculations. And again, why you would need that particular person. And then the other category, these are just things that don't fall nicely into one of the established budget categories. A lot of times it's the registration for different conferences, trainings, or workshops. That would fall in your other category. And then what the justification for those items are. And then you want to do a summary. So what the overall costs look like. I break it down per year and then I do a total. So it's very clear where we're going in each of the different grant years. And then again, if there are match dollars, I make sure it's clearly labeled as such in my budget. So just plan for everything. So again, looking at the review of the program design, describing your problem, establishing your goal, then your implementation or your input objectives, your performance, your output, your budget, and your evaluation impact and outcome. So here's your logic model. Follows through accordingly through the different steps in really a very basic format of describing your problem and then following it through to what you really want to do to institute change. So like we talked about before, the performance measurement tools will benefit all different parties and are used very broadly a lot of times to continue funding projects. Your logic model is a nice tool for program design, basic for your next steps, and formulating your objectives. And I'll say this a few times, the absolute, if anyone asked me what is the #1 rule of grant writing, if there was only one thing to tell about grant writing and designing the proposal, the most important thing sounds so simple, but it absolutely 100% is follow the directions. You want to definitely follow the directions exactly. A lot of times what I find in reading different proposals, when you get in there and you're writing and you're kind of in the groove, you can talk a lot about your different problem and your program or your design, and you might lose sight a little bit of what exactly the solicitation has asked. So following the directions is absolutely crucial. So grant writing can be, I think, a little overwhelming to some and at some times. So if you look at it in the whole broad picture, you might, oh my goodness, this is a lot of work. So I try to take it one piece at a time. Okay, today I'm going to work on this section. Tomorrow I'll look at this section. So you just want to make sure that you take it off in little chunks. It's a bit of work. It's very rewarding though. When you're successful and you obtain that award, it really is truly a great feeling. So the tips part is, I think, one of the most illuminating parts for me. I love this section. So keep these things in mind. So before a proposal even comes out, work with the different people in your agency to hold regular brainstorming sessions. Continue to look at, as a group, what needs you're addressing, what are the visions, what you'd like to do. Always check the literature, the newsletters, the websites for announcements and things that might be useful. I'm a paper and electronic pack rat by now, so any documents that come across that I think I might be able to use to justify a different program or different area I'm looking at in a grant, I keep that all in little folders to use to justify if I'm looking at a certain program and I know it worked in another state or it is on one of the best practices. Gain that, gather that information and keep that for future use. And this is important. When an opportunity surfaces, you want to determine the feasibility of obtaining that grant. If you get the grant, are you going to be able to actually operate it? Can the agency manage another program? Does the agency have the experience and expertise? A lot of times we see a bunch of different proposals, and some are very appropriate for our agency and some just clearly aren't. So then I pass them forward to maybe a different agency that it is more appropriate for. So you want to make sure you can actually handle the program that you're designing. If you have questions, definitely contact the program manager or the help desk or any person associated with the funding source. You want to make sure that you don't go forward with maybe any unanswered questions. If there's something you're in doubt, get confirmation, contact their world of help. It is just much better to ask those questions up front, and everyone's very useful in giving you the guidance you would need if you think something's appropriate or fits in a particular grant or might not. So again, follow the application guidelines in detail. You want to make sure that you have that solicitation and you're looking at each of those different items. Create a timetable and gather appropriate personnel for the grant writing as soon as that funding availability is announced. A lot of times, you know, we'll do a lot of team writings. There's various people in the agency. Maybe you have someone who's very great at describing the problem and is a more database person, someone who's much better at the budget calculations. So kind of build your team and create that timetable for you to finish those different items and take a look at who's good at what and how you can all work together. You want to keep in mind that you have to customize that proposal for the target funder. So when you're talking about your program, making sure it's appropriate for the solicitation you're responding to. A lot of times I might take a previous grant, if it follows the same format, to kind of jumpstart me when I'm writing the next grant. So you want to make sure, though, that you take a look at that and it's actually targeted to the right funder. You want to describe the program with rich detail, measurable objectives, and not empty adjectives and excessive languages. I love language. I talk a lot. I know that one thing I keep in mind in my grant writing is to get to the point. You want to be able to say what you need to say and say it in a very convincing, pointed fashion. So while there's some lovely adjectives and some, you know, great use of words in a lot of the things I read, you want to make sure that you kind of hone in on what exactly you're doing. And I think that there's some great statements like, you know, as a result of this program, everyone will get along better and the whole world will change. And that's lovely. You just want to make sure that when you're grant writing that you've got things measurable and things straight and to the point. And in the grant world, you definitely want to propose your innovative ideas and solutions. So grants are the opportunity to maybe take a look outside the box, take a look at what's different, not something maybe that's been traditionally in any kind of agency budget. This is your opportunity to try something new, try a solution that maybe you've had and just haven't had the available funds to do so. I know a lot of different states and agencies might be in budget situations, so you want to describe that there's not funding available. And I mean, in your problem statement, definitely say, you know, we can't get this off the ground because. And then this is your opportunity to be creative, to try something that's different, to look at the solution. You want to use subheadings and citations. So you want to make sure that if, when I look at a solicitation, if it says statement of problem, the heading I use is statement of problem. If it says problem statement, I say problem statement. It might sound like a little bit of a stickler, but I want to mirror back the exact language in the solicitation. And that's important. That keeps it on point for the different funder that you're applying to. So you want to also avoid the passive voice. You want to use active verbs. So you want, when you're writing your grant proposal, know that you're going to do it. Know that you're doing this program. You're, again, like I said earlier, that you're confident that it comes out very convincing. So use the active verbs. Not, you think maybe the result will be, go ahead and claim it. You want to make sure that the reader knows that you're going for it. You know, I'm going to come in, we will do this. This many people are going to be served, and you want to make sure that it comes across in your writing. And then we talked about describing the problem that's the same size as the solution. You know, don't chicken little it up. You want to use your local data. And if the data needs to be updated, or if there's some data that's called for and you don't quite have it, what I do is I go ahead and I call myself out in the solicitation. If I maybe have a recidivism rate or some sort of number that it calls for, and maybe it's dated, I'll say, okay, this is the most current data I have. And then I describe the plan to obtain, you know, the updated information. So if something is there, you don't want to let something go through, and you don't want to lose points on not mentioning maybe a particular required item. If you don't have it, call yourself out and then give the action plan as to what you're going to do to get that. This is big. You don't want to assume the reader knows, the reader of your proposal knows much about the subject matter. So a lot of times when we're reviewing grants here, we will pull in somebody from a completely different grant area, or somebody from a whole different population, or a whole different set of eyes. So you want to make sure when you're writing your whole proposal that you describe exactly what you need to for it to be a full package. My poor families, a lot of times I'll bring home a grant and say, you know, read this, and does it make sense? Can you tell me what we're going to do? You know, take someone who's outside of your whole world maybe, and have them take a look at it if they have the time, and see if they can articulate back to you what your problem is and what you're going to do about it in some kind of cohesive way. So again, keep in mind your capability of measuring the impact objectives. You want to make sure that you can go ahead and get any data that you need. It's very important. It sounds, again, so simple, to keep the format and the page limits. You want to keep them in mind. If the solicitation says 12-point new times Roman, 12-inch margins, double spaced, absolutely do that. Make sure it is double spaced. Make sure, because a lot of times if you have maybe only 15 pages, it doesn't feel like a lot when you're writing. So, but if you cut the corners or make it single spaced, it could actually potentially bump you out of the running. You want to make sure that you don't do these little tiny things that knock you out of any consideration. So I follow it to a T. The page limits are definitely there for a reason. And as a reader of a lot of proposals, when you review the grants, it's a blessing when they're all adhered to. So I immediately, when I look at a solicitation, I pay attention to the review criteria. So I will go through and find out if there's a scoring mechanism and what that looks like. You want to make sure you understand what emphasis is given to what section to each section of the proposal. So, and they change for different grants. So when I go in and I look, I might see that the problem statement for one grant is 30% of my points. On another grant, it might only be 15%. So I try to keep in mind how much of the proposal I've dedicated to that section. So if you have 15 pages and your problem statement might only be 10 or 15%, and you go back and you look and you have 5 or 6 pages of a problem statement, you might want to consider paring that down a little bit. It may be the first section. You do want to hook your reader, but you want to make sure that if you're writing in a particular section, that it's about the right page length that matches kind of the weight it's been given in the review criteria. When I look at the solicitation, I actually copy the bullet points in a lot, especially the BJA grants. The solicitation will give you each of the different bullet points in each of the different subsections of a narrative. I will copy and paste the exact questions from the solicitation and put them in my document. And until I've answered that question, I don't erase it. I will leave it in there in bold and red, and I go back and make sure, because those bullet points are how your proposal is scored. So you want to make sure that you answer every single question that's contained in the solicitation. That's how you're going to get funded. That's how the scores are going to be built. So make sure every bullet point is answered in that program narrative. You want to build the rapport with the different partners. So make sure that if you're working maybe on a program in the community, but your referral source is the Department of Corrections or a school or some different entity, make sure you've built that rapport with those partners ahead of time as best as possible. And building the rapport is crucial in grant writing, because a lot of times you're running up against some deadlines and they come fast. You want to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody for that data right away. You want to make sure that when you're getting your letters of support or your memorandums of understanding, that you've already built the rapport with these different partners, so they have the trust in you when you're bringing this grant and this application to them, and they feel comfortable signing on and doing that. I always write like the reader. So when I'm writing my different grants and my proposal, I will write and then go back, like I'm the reader. I want to know, would I fund me? So does this sound convincing? So I always try to write in keeping the reader in mind. So what would I think of this program and how I described it? So always proofread. And we're getting close to time here. I think I'm very close to the end. So a couple other little things I do. I use bold text and exact wording to direct the reviewers to the required elements. So if they're asking for a target population, I might put the word target population in bold, so the reviewer goes exactly to that, and they see that I mentioned that required element. You want to be mindful of all the attachments and the documents. Those are little things that'll hold you up. So you want to make sure you have all the different things and components for your grant, all the attachments, all the different letters. What I do is, they say in the solicitation, name the files accordingly. I do. If it's called program narrative, I call it program narrative. And then one little simple thing I do in my computer, I make a final document folder for that particular grant, and I call it final documents. That way you don't accidentally upload maybe a draft. It makes it very clear in calling it that final folder. Use the checklist that they give you in the solicitations, or create one. Pay attention to the required elements necessary for moving forward in the review process. They'll tell you which items are essential to submit to make sure you get into the review. And then follow the directions. Again, it is one of the most important things, absolutely, to take. Here I just give you some different websites that contain useful information. So go ahead and hop on those and find different things that could be useful for your grants. And that's all I have. So
Okay, that was the end of the webinar. We're very close to the ending time. One thing that I thought is that I think a difference to scientific grant writing is that like with these programs, you kind of have like more certainties, because you can kind of plan like what you will do, and of course you can't really plan for the outcome, you can only hope for that. But I think the difference to science would be that you kind of have to make things up as you go, and I'm not sure how grants work for that, like if you get like maybe like preliminary drafts or something, grants. So if someone quickly wants to say something to that, otherwise we'll close for today, because it is the end of the time. Yeah, okay, there's no one wanting to add something to that, but I thought the talk was really interesting, maybe not that specific to like I was like, I literally didn't know like what she was talking about most of the time, but I thought it was really interesting to kind of see, because obviously like, for example, like these like programs, like for example like victim recovery programs or things like that are really important. So I thought it was really interesting. But yeah, thank you all for listening, and I think next week the TMS is not on, so see you then in 2 weeks.